And today we're going to talk about the 4 levels of productivity. But first, I'd like to direct you in Zoom. There's some different options. If you happen to see the view button in the upper right-hand corner, you'll get some options for speaker view or gallery view. Go ahead and come into speaker view because this is where I'm going to be sharing my slides. This is a new beta feature that Zoom has where you can share your slides as a virtual background. And so that's what I'm going to be doing today, is sharing these slides in the virtual background. And what I'd like to do to kick us off is I'd like to know, what time is it where you are? Go ahead and type it in the chat box and just let me know, what time is it right now for you? I know we've got some people from a lot of different time zones. We've got 4 Mountain for Al. We've got some 3 o'clocks. We've got a 5, just early. Martina's just up early. Well, for me, it is 10:02 in the morning on Friday because I live in New Zealand. And for my North American friends, this means that I do live in the future. Spoiler alert, the future's still here. So everything's all good. I'll keep you posted if anything changes. So I'd like to ask you another question, and I want you to write the answer in the chat box, but I don't want you to hit enter right away, because we're all going to hit enter at the end of 30 seconds together. And what I'd like you to answer is this question. What's the hardest thing about productivity? Take 30 seconds to write your answer, but don't hit enter yet until the end of the song. All right, let's all hit enter in 3, 2, 1. Focus. Lots of focus. Fits and starts. Yeah, that's a tough one. Prioritization. What should I do? Or what should I do next? The amount of things to work on. Finding a system that works consistently. Yeah, these are great. These are great. Now, these are all things that we're going to cover today in the 4 levels of productivity. We're going to talk about how to manage your tasks, your time, and your priorities. I'm going to go through some of the current popular systems of productivity, how they work and what they're about. And my goal for today is to give you a system that could radically transform your life. I'm going to give you the slides at the end through this link here at the bottom. So don't feel like you have to go through things really quickly for fear of losing it, because we're going to, I'll give you everything at the end, but I'll go over a quick agenda of what we're going to talk about today. The first thing we're going to talk about is when to wear your thinking cap versus your doing cap, and how to separate thinking and doing. I'll go through those 3 different productivity systems that I mentioned earlier, and I'll share with you how you can alternate periods of focus with periods of rest, because that's going to optimize your performance. These are the 3 systems that we're going to talk about today. First things first, getting things done, and the 4 disciplines of execution. And thankfully, each of these also has a book of the same name: First Things First, Getting Things Done, and the 4 Disciplines of Execution. We're going to do a brief overview of each one of these systems. But if you find something that really resonates with you, these are the rabbit holes that you can dive deeply into. But even if none of these systems really fit for you, what I want to do is give you tools that you can pilfer for your own toolbox. Because the best system for productivity for you isn't the one that works the best for me or for Lauren or for Craig. The best one that works well for you is the one that works well for you. So it might be a combination of pieces from this system and that system that you cobble together for your own productivity toolbox. Now, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you today, so I want you to take notes. Go ahead and get a pen and a notebook nearby, and anytime there's an idea that resonates with you, write it down. If there's something that's actionable, that's something you can do later, I want you to draw a little star next to it in your notebook. So that way, when you review your notes, you can see at a glance everything that needs to be done, everything that you can take an action on. But if you like to take notes digitally, then I invite you to open up Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever your favorite social media profile is, and feel free during this presentation to write notes down over there. If you like, you can tag me at Caelan Huntress. My name's spelled in the corner of every slide. I know it's kind of tough to spell, but you can feel free to tag me and do hashtag productivity on anything that you post or you share. But like I said, you're going to have the slides at the end. So if you want to dig deeper into some of these concepts later, then you'll have the opportunity to do that. Sound good so far? Great. Okay. All right. So having a system for your productivity is one of the ways that you can get ahead. Because we all have 24 hours in a day, and that's it. But some of us can make more out of those 24 hours. Some of us end up very successful by the end of our lives, while others flounder for half their career. And quite often, the difference between someone who's a success and someone who's a failure is their ability to manage their time. Managing your time and your tasks allows you to get more out of the same time that everyone else has. When you set up a simple system to manage your tasks, your time, and your priorities, then you can make the most of the time that you've got. You can stop wasting your time on doing the wrong thing, and the volume and the impact of your work is increased. I first started learning productivity when I was 29 years old, and somebody handed me this book, Getting Things Done. This is the second book that we're going to talk about today. And this book turned my whole life around. I was 29 years old and I was selling car insurance at the time. And in case you're wondering, car insurance is as boring as it sounds. This is what I looked like back at 29 years old. And when they handed me this book, it was the last thing that I wanted to do was study another topic, because I was exhausted and broke and I had a mortgage and a baby. And they said, here, study this too. And it was the last thing I wanted to do. But I was so glad that I did, because the difference that this made in my life was huge. I suddenly had time to go to the gym every day. I stopped working late hours and I could go home and see my family at night. What I liked so much about selling car insurance is that I was compensated based on how productive I spent my day. If I sold more policies, if I made more phone calls, I made more money. And I started tracking my activity, because that's one of the things that Getting Things Done teaches you how to do, is to track the activity that you are doing so that you can make more intelligent decisions about your activity in the future. And I saw that for every 25 phone calls that I made, on average, I sold a car insurance policy. And it's great that Lauren's here, ironically, because she was one of my car insurance customers. What was it, 15 years ago? So I'm happy that you showed up today. But when I learned this valuable piece of data, that 25 phone calls equaled one sale, then I was able to use that to plan my day. I saw that I'd be able to win a prestigious award if I averaged 3 sales a day. So I knew if I averaged 75 phone calls a day, I could meet my goal. And it became a simple system for achievement. But that wasn't the biggest advantage of learning productivity for me. I had, when I was first handed the desk, I put it down on top of this big pile of papers that were never getting addressed. My desk was a total mess. And within 6 months after reading this book, I was able to clear off my desk, so that the only thing on my desk was the one thing I was supposed to be working on. And this gave me clarity of mind. I learned that what was in front of me was the most important thing to do, and everything else could wait till later. And the big mind shift that I needed to do this was to learn how to separate thinking and doing. Thinking and doing are two fundamentally different mindsets. When you're wearing your thinking cap, you can do all sorts of thinking related tasks. When you're wearing your doing cap, you can crush a checklist, do this and then do that and then do this other thing. Where we get into trouble is when we try and switch. You're doing things and you're getting a lot done. And then you say, wait, is this the right thing for me to be doing? Maybe I should go back and review my list. It totally throws you out of flow. It's like the difference between a plane at 30,000 feet and a plane at ground level. There's a lot of things that a plane can do at 30,000 feet that it cannot do on the ground, and vice versa. When a plane's up in the air, it can see the entire landscape. It can make slight changes that have drastic effects. It can travel around the world. But when a plane's on the runway, it can let off passengers and take them on. It can turn on a dime. If a plane at 30,000 feet thinks, oh my gosh, I have to let off a couple passengers real quick, it takes time to come in for a landing and put the landing gear down and decelerate. And if it's letting off passengers and says, oh my gosh, I need to get over to Istanbul, it takes time to accelerate up to speed and get up into the air. And the same thing happens when you switch caps. When you're doing your thinking, keep your thinking cap on. Do strategic level tasks and don't fall into execution because there's a switching cost. If you're doing the doing and you're crushing your checklist, coming out of that and wondering whether or not this is the right thing to do, it's like taking off on a runway and it takes you time. If you do that 12 times throughout the day, you're spending most of your time transitioning instead of batching your work, doing all your thinking tasks at once, and then doing all your doing tasks at once. Finding a process so that you can postpone the opposite kind of tasks when they show up while you're in flow, that's part of the critical work of productivity. As Charlie Gilkey says, use your creativity and mental horsepower to figure out how to do the work, not what the work is. When you're in doing mode, stay doing. Take a transition to go to thinking mode and then stay thinking. Steve Jobs famously wore the same outfit for more than a decade. And the reason why he did this, why he wore the black turtleneck and the blue jeans, is because he didn't have to think about what he was going to wear that day. He got up in the morning, he put on his outfit without thinking about it at all, to preserve his limited thinking capacity to go into headquarters and plan new products for Apple. Part of the reason we have this suite of smartphone accessories from Apple Inc. is because Steve Jobs made this choice with his wardrobe. He preserved his thinking time for when it mattered most, and he didn't get distracted with switching his thinking cap and his doing cap. So I want you to think about this as we move forward. How could you batch your tasks so that when you're in thinking mode, you can be your own boss and decide what to do? When you're in doing mode, you're the employee who's carrying out the orders that you, the boss, gave to you earlier. You don't need to jump in and contradict the boss that you were 3 hours ago. You can simply execute. Now, I like this framework for separating thinking and doing, but it's very delegation oriented. And I'm a creative. And so sometimes I find it helpful to think about it as the difference between a patron and an artisan. The patron is the Caelan that decides on the vision for what I want to achieve. And the artisan is the inner craftsperson that actually does the work. Now, if my inner craftsperson is in the middle of executing on something, I'm writing an email, I'm designing a sales page, I'm preparing a presentation, and then I have an idea that the patron needs to know about, I save that idea for later when I have my thinking cap on. I don't pursue it right then. And likewise, the opposite is true. If I'm in patron time and I'm looking at the vision of what I want to do, and I have and I see a project that I could execute on, I don't do it right then. I put it on my list so that when I'm in doing mode and I'm already on the runway, that's when I can do those tasks. It's about knowing your altitude. While you're at 30,000 feet, stay up there. When you're on the runway, stay down there. And when you switch between the two, make it intentional. If you're going to learn one thing from me today, this is the one thing. Answer this question at the beginning of your day. What's the most important priority for me today? If you can answer this question, it serves as the true north for everything else you're supposed to be doing. So right now, I'd like to take 30 seconds and invite you to answer this question. You can type it in the chat box if you like, or write it in your own notebook, but take 30 seconds and write down what's the most important priority for you, either today or tomorrow. Great. Okay, thank you for those of you who shared in the chat box. Yeah, Martina, having a number of equally important things to do, I've got a solution for that, and we're going to talk about that next. There's never just one most important priority. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, we're going to dig into this. Great. Excellent goals. Yeah, great. Great. Okay, so you've done one of the most important things by writing down a goal. Writing down a goal is going to make it statistically more likely that you'll achieve your goal. There was a study done by Dr. Gail Butler at Dominican University, and she found that when you write down a goal, it makes it 42% more likely that you're going to achieve it just by writing it down. Part of that is because you've clarified it. It's no longer this idea of something you should do. Now it's practical. You've fleshed it out a little bit. You've externalized it. It's no longer just something floating around in your head. It's written down on a piece of paper. But more importantly, it gives you the opportunity to review it. Writing down your goals will only get you so far. Regularly reviewing those goals will get you much, much farther. And I'm going to tell you a story about Ivy Lee to illustrate why. I read this story on James Clear's blog a few years ago, and Ivy Lee was a productivity consultant who went to go see Charles Schwab, the steel magnate. And Charles Schwab said, I don't need another productivity consultant. I've got enough people already. And he said, well, I understand that. You're a busy man, so I only want 15 minutes of your time and you don't have to pay me for it. Charles Schwab said, okay, come into my office first thing tomorrow. I'll see you at 8 a.m. Ivy Lee comes in and he hands Charles Schwab a piece of paper and he says, write down the 6 most important things for you to do today. If you did these 6 things, your day would be a success. So Charles Schwab wrote down 6 things and he said, now prioritize them in order. The most important thing, write a number 1 next to it. The second most important thing, write a number 2 and go down the list. So Charles Schwab does 1 through 6. And Ivy Lee hands him an index card and he says, now write these in order, 1 through 6 on this index card. Charles Schwab writes them down. And Ivy Lee says, now fold this index card and put it in your pocket. And I want you to work on item number 1 until it's done, and then work on item number 2. Don't move further in the list until you finished item number 2, until it's done, and then move to item number 3. Now, throughout the day, lots of people are going to demand your attention. You're going to be interrupted. You'll change priorities, and then you're going to have that moment after you finish that cycle where you wonder, what is it that I do next? And when that happens, I want you to take out this card to remind yourself what you already decided your next priority was. And if you think this idea is valuable, you can send me a check later for whatever you think it's worth. Well, 6 weeks later, Charles Schwab sent Ivy Lee a check for $25,000, which in today's dollars is about 400 grand. And he said, this technique is so valuable that I now use it with my entire executive team. You didn't have to pay $400,000 or $25,000 or a penny for that idea, but you have it now. So if you have multiple competing priorities, do this exercise at the beginning of the day. While you have on your thinking cap, decide what order these priorities need to go in. And then throughout your day, this is your true north. When you get distracted and you have other things to do, come back to this index card and work on what you already decided was the next important priority. Now, I do this in multiple lists. I use a Trello board, and each list is day, week, month, quarter, and year. And so I'll make a list of everything that I want to do today. And if I don't finish things on that list, I drag them to my list for the week. At the end of the week, anything that's not done, I either say, yes, I'm going to do that this month, or I take it off the list entirely. But by having a drag and drop method to continually reprioritize, it helps me stay true to my goals. Goals are aspirations unless you define when they happen. As Napoleon Hill said, a goal is a dream with a deadline. Articulating your goals in a specific way is going to make it more likely that you'll achieve it. There was a paper published in the 1981 issue of Management Review, and George Doran defined the acronym SMART and applied it to goal setting. He said that some goals are SMART goals. They're specific, measurable, assignable, relevant, and time-bound. Other people since then have replaced some of the letters in the acronym because, if you're not a manager, assignable might not be appropriate. Ambitious or achievable might be better, or realistic or timely. Some people have made smarter goals so that they can be evaluated or recorded. And so what I'd like to do is take 30 seconds, and I'd like you to identify the words in this acronym that resonate for you. Go ahead and write down the words that you like for your goals. Great. Okay. Great. A SMAT goal. I like that, Joyce. Great. Having a goal that's written down in this way, it helps you clarify what it is you really want to achieve. And the further you can clarify your goals, the more likely it is that you'll achieve it. But sometimes we over-goal. Has anybody ever created a big, long list of goals to achieve, and then you find yourself completely unable to do it? Yeah. Yeah. Too many goals. Yeah. Yeah. That often results in busyness, where we're intimidated by the amount of things that we have to achieve. And so often we find ourselves curating and pruning those lists of goals just to make them manageable. Because if you have too many goals and it makes you feel busy, then you could feel like you have this badge of honor that Western culture gives to us. You're busy, you've got a lot to do. But I want to challenge that. I love what Cal Newport says. He said, if you're busy, you're doing something wrong. Busyness is a failure of systems. Being busy is the lowest stage on the productivity ladder. Well, it's not actually the lowest. I always thought it was, but then I found this word from the 17th century, spuddle. When you spuddle, it means you work ineffectively and you're extremely busy and achieving absolutely nothing. Anybody ever had a spuddle period before? You know what it's like, spuddle? Yeah. So spuddle is technically below busy, but we don't want to look below that. We want to look above. When you're busy, the next step out is to get efficient, which means you can handle everything on your desk. But being efficient isn't like being effective. Efficient means that you're doing everything, but being effective means that you're doing things that matter. Peter Drucker said, there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. So keep that in mind. Just because you're feeling efficient, it doesn't necessarily mean you're effective. And then there's this level beyond effective, where you're leveraged, where the work that you do isn't limited by your personal input. There's a magnifying effect to your work that goes beyond you. Leverage is a physics term, and in physics, the further you get from the fulcrum, the more leverage you have. The more leverage you have, the less effort you need to create an impact, to make motion. Archimedes famously said, give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I can move the world. So consider your leverage. How far can you get from the execution in order to make an impact? These 4 levels correspond to swimming terms. When you're leveraged, that's when you're floating above the water. And it doesn't matter the swells in the ocean that come around, you've got a life jacket on and you're always serenely floating at the top. When you're effective, you're treading water. There's not really a big problem. It takes a lot of effort, but you can safely breathe. Being efficient, doing lots of things that don't necessarily matter, that'll leave you gasping. And being busy is when you're underwater. Now, if you had to pick one of these levels right now, go ahead and type it in the chat box and let me know where you are in your life and career right now. Where do you feel that you are on this ladder? Are you busy? Are you underwater? Are you gasping, just barely efficient? Are you treading water because you're effective? Martina's down in Spuddle. I know how that feels. I know how that feels. Yeah. Between treading and floating, between busy and efficient. Yeah, great. A lot of us find ourselves in these transition points. And these transitions correspond to the 3 systems that we're going to go over today. If you're busy and you want to get efficient, read Getting Things Done. If you're efficient and you want to get effective, read First Things First. If you're effective and you want to be leveraged, read The 4 Disciplines of Execution. We're going to go over the basics of all of these books right now, and I'm going to do a superficial overview. I'm going to go through some of the basic core points of each book, but I won't go deep enough to really teach you the entire system. If you want to do that, go get the book and read it more deeply, okay? So because it's first, it's in the title, we're going to start with First Things First. This was written by Dr. Stephen Covey, who was also the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he wrote that after studying many highly effective people and learning and documenting their habits. So he knows a thing or two about being effective. And one of the core components of this book is the Eisenhower decision-making quadrant. This was developed by Dwight Eisenhower when he was a general in the Second World War. And with anything that crossed his desk, he asked two questions of it. Is this important? And is this urgent? And the answer to that question put it in one of these quadrants. Things that are important and urgent are things you should do. Things that are important and not urgent are things you should plan to do. If it's not important, but it is urgent, delegate it to somebody else to do it. And if it's not important and not urgent, eliminate it. Get it off your desk so that you can focus your time on what matters more. Now, here's some examples of each of these. Quadrant 1, things that are important and urgent, are things like an angry client calling you, or a crying baby in the other room, or your dog is on fire. You got to take care of it right away. You can't put it off, right? That's quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 are things like exercise, calling old friends, planning out your year. There's no urgency built into quadrant 2 activities. You don't have to do them right away. But if you do them, it has a big impact on your life. And we're going to answer that question in just a second, Martina. How to do quadrant 2. Mark Twain has some good advice for us on that. Quadrant 3, urgent things that are not important are usually interruptions. Somebody's calling you on the phone, but you don't know who it is. That's urgent, but it's not important. The meetings you have to attend, the notifications you get on your phone. Who cares that somebody commented on your post on LinkedIn? It's urgent because it's showing up right now, but it's not important to your life and career. Things that are not important and not urgent are lots of your paperwork, lots of your email, and doom scrolling. You don't have to do that. It doesn't change your life, and you don't have to do it now. What I find interesting is that Eisenhower thought that most things which are urgent are not important, and most things which are important are not urgent, which means most important things fall in quadrant 2. Things that are not urgent. You don't have to get to the gym by 3 p.m. today. But if you go to the gym at 3 p.m. every day, it'll have a dramatic impact on your life. Sometimes we manufacture urgency by saying, I have to be there by 3, or I'm going to meet my workout buddy. Finding a way to create urgency is one way to handle quadrant 2. But I like what this story about stones and sand that's often told. I can't find the source for this story, but the story goes that there was a professor who walked into a university class with a bucket of rocks and a jar of sand. And he poured the sand into the rocks, and it filled the bucket to the brim. And then he asked his students, what do you notice? And they said, well, it fills it right up to the top. And he says, great, now watch this. And he takes out a filter, and he filters out the sand, pours out the rocks, and puts the sand in first. Fills up the jar about halfway. And then he puts in the rocks, and it doesn't all fit. The rocks are overflowing off to the side. So he filters out the sand again, starts with the rocks, and then the sand finds places in all the nooks and crannies between the big rocks, and everything fits. Quadrant 2 is your big rocks. Those are the big stones that if you put those in first, if you do those in the early part of your day, all the urgent tasks will find places to fit in around them. But if you start with quadrant 2, you'll be able to fit in all of your priorities. As Mark Twain said, if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. In another publication, he said, if you eat a live frog the first thing in the morning, nothing worse will happen to you for the rest of the day. And in a totally separate work, he said, if you have to swallow a frog, don't stare at it too long. Now, I don't know what his thing was with eating frogs, but maybe it's part of his down-home folksy wisdom is that frogs are a great source of protein. So anyway, do the big rocks first. Focus on quadrant 2, and then you'll be able to get the right things done. And this is one of the ways that you can manage your tasks and your time. Prioritize quadrant 2. On your checklist, in your calendar, if you see something that's important and not urgent, move it to the top of the list. Get it on the top of the index card. Do that first because it's a big rock. But to do this, you need to have a system for measuring your tasks and your time. As Jim Rohn shared with us, what gets measured gets managed. If you don't measure your time, you can't manage your time. You can measure your tasks and your time in the past, the present, and the future. You register what it is that you want to do. You plan your tasks, you schedule your time. In the future, you review what you did and how long you took. But there's this center column for the present where you need to record your tasks and your time. Keeping a checklist is an easy way to monitor your tasks. And you need a process for managing your time in the present moment, so it doesn't take all of your time to record it. There's a bunch of time tracking apps you can use, Timely and Toggle. They're browser-based extensions, so you just click a button to clock in and clock out. With Rescue Time, you can categorize that you're working on this task and then switch to this other task. And this gives you really useful data. Rescue Time analyzed 50,000 of their users, and they found that most employees spend an average of 38% of their time on their core skills. How much time do you spend on your core skills? If you had to make a guess, type it in the chat box and let me know, how much time do you spend on the things that really matter? Is it more than 50%? Is it less than 20%? How much time do you spend on what really matters? So personally, I don't use a time tracking app. I use iCal. iCal is the standard Mac calendar suite where I can plan what I'm going to work on, and then I work that plan. I use color-coded blocks to decide what I'm going to work on hour to hour in 15-minute chunks. Then as I go through my week, as I'm continually checking my true north, what am I supposed to work on right now? If I change what I work on, I make tiny adjustments. So this was a week at the beginning of this year, January 2021. The same week at the end of the week looked like this. I moved things around. Some meetings went over. Some calls got canceled. So this allowed me to retain a flexibility to work on what I wanted to work on, but by having an instantaneous way to record in the moment, I could keep track. And this gives me useful data. Every week I have my assistant go through these calendars and log how much time I spend in each category and put it in a spreadsheet. So at the end of the week, I can see how much time I spent on different activities. And if I want different results, if I want more revenue, I know I have to spend more time in sales. If I want to get more work done on my book, I know I have to spend more time in writing. What gets measured gets managed. So that's first things first. We've gone through a lot of the different aspects of prioritizing and planning your time. And now I want to go into getting things done. This is the book that I read that took me on this whole productivity journey. And getting things done is about how to capture, clarify, and organize ideas. It's not a task management system. It's an idea management system. And task management comes as a part of that. But primarily, this system is about your ideas. It's about how to capture those ideas when you're in flow and not get interrupted. So if you've got your doing cap on and you're doing a bunch of things and an idea comes by and it's great, you put it in your inbox. Your inbox can be physical or it could be digital, but it's the single repository for everything that you have to do, that you're going to do, that you're thinking about doing. When you're in flow, you don't need to process it right then. You just put it in the inbox where you know you're going to process it later. Every phone call you need to make, every receipt you need to file, every idea you come up with, they all go into the same inbox. When it's in the inbox, there's one of four things that you can do with it. You can do it, delegate it, defer it, or delete it. Processing your inbox is doing one of these four things to everything inside of it. Now, the system is a little more complicated than that, and I'm not going to go deeply into it. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, go read the book. But the primary component here is the inbox. Having a place to capture your ideas. That's the first concept I want to share with you. The next two concepts are the 2-minute rule and what's the next action. The 2-minute rule is simple, okay? If it takes less than 2 minutes, do it right then. That's it. If it takes less than 2 minutes, do it right then. You know, there's this old saying, only handle mail once. If you're going to take the time to open an envelope, then file the paperwork or put it in the recycling bin or make the phone call so that way you don't have a stack of minor tasks that blows up into an hour-long project. If you continually use the 2-minute rule and do it right then, when it's in your hands, it prevents those small tasks from combining into another project that you have to handle. What's the next action is a question you can use to interrogate items on your list that aren't getting done. Anybody ever had something on a list that just was there every week and every month and it isn't getting accomplished? Yeah. A lot of times the reason why this happens is because your task doesn't start with a verb. If your task starts with a verb, then you know what the next action is. So I'll give you an example. Productivity Masterclass. If I had that on my list, what does that mean? Plan slides for Productivity Masterclass, process recording for Productivity Masterclass, invite people. Everything that starts with a verb is a task I can execute on. But if I have a vague task that doesn't start with a verb, it's easy for me to ignore it, to move it further down the list. And so asking this question, what's the next action? This is a great way to move through the tasks. So the 2-minute rule, what's the next action, and the inbox are 3 of the 4 main components. The 4th one is the weekly review. And the weekly review is a scheduled time on your calendar where you don't take any calls or any meetings or do anything else. You just process the inbox. You do it, delegate it, defer it, or delete it for everything that's in the inbox. And having this dedicated time where you work on your inbox, it means that if you have this great idea or there's a task that you know you have to get done, you can put it in the inbox safely. And you know that on Monday morning or Friday afternoon or whenever it is, you're going to get to it. If you don't do a weekly review, putting things in the inbox might freak you out because then it's like, when am I going to get to that? I don't know. But if you know Monday morning is when the inbox gets processed, you can let things go safely and move on. So that's the basics of the getting things done system. If you combine this system with the decision-making quadrant that we went over earlier, then you can ask these 2 questions. Can I do this in 2 minutes? And what's the next, can I take the next action? And you can get these answers. If you could take the next action and do it in 2 minutes, do it right then. If you can't take the next action, but it takes less than 2 minutes, delegate it to somebody who can. If you can take the next action, but you can't do it in 2 minutes, defer it to when you're going to do it on a scheduled time on your calendar. And if you can't take the next action and you can't do it in 2 minutes, consider just deleting it and getting it out of your way. So there's a lot of ways that you can capture your ideas in a digital inbox with a GTD app. A lot of people use this hashtag GTD. There's a big community of people who use this system. And these are some of the apps. that they use. I personally use Things by Cultured Code. It's Mac only. It's the one I've been using for 10 years. Todoist is PC friendly. It's a browser-based app. But I like this app, Remember the Milk. Not because the app itself is fine, but what I love about it is the name, because it references a story in Getting Things Done. And David Allen says in this story in the book, Getting Things Done, he says, imagine you're in a meeting and at 10:30 in the morning, you remember that you have to pick up milk on the way home. So the whole meeting, you're trying to remember that you want to remember the milk. You get out of the meeting and get back to your desk and you're thinking, I have to remember the milk. You go to lunch and you're telling yourself, don't forget the milk. And the whole day, you're carrying around this piece of information to remember the milk. When what you could do at 10:30 in the morning, when the thought strikes you to remember the milk, is to take out your phone and set an alarm for 5 p.m. that says, remember the milk. And you can forget it all day. And at the end of the day, your alarm pops up and says, remember the milk. And you've been able to preserve your thinking time all day long. As David Allen says, your mind is for having ideas, not holding them. Our mind is actually really inefficient at holding our ideas. The conscious mind is like RAM, or random access memory, while your subconscious mind is like ROM, or read-only memory. And our brains, as you may know, are 90% subconscious. Our conscious mind is this tiny little sliver of 10% of our brains. And in your computer, it works the same way. You might have 16 gigabytes of RAM, which means your computer is moving pretty fast, and 300 gigabytes of ROM, where you can store things. Now, if you want to remember the milk, and you put that in your random access memory on that little memory stick, your ability to process things fast is decreased. And that's really the purpose of your RAM. And your conscious mind isn't for holding ideas, it's for having them. So that's the second of our 3 books today, Getting Things Done. And now I want to share with you the 4 disciplines of execution. This book was written by Sean Covey, who was the son of Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of the first book. And he wrote it with 2 other consultants at the Franklin Covey Corporation. And they do the Franklin Covey planners, and the whole Franklin Covey empire is this big time management system and suite of products. And they do a lot of work with big Fortune 500 companies on going into their organizations and upgrading their teams. And so over decades, they've accumulated all these case studies on implementing this system that they have for the 4 disciplines of execution. So the book is full of statistics in these case studies of practical results from using these 4 disciplines. And these are the 4 disciplines right here. Discipline 1 is to focus on the wildly important. Discipline 2 is to act on the lead measures. Discipline 3 is to keep a compelling scoreboard. And discipline 4 is to create a cadence of accountability. And I'll go through each one of these in turn. The first discipline, to focus on the wildly important, is similar to the Pareto principle. Pareto was an Italian economist who found that 80% of your results generally come from 20% of your effort. And the converse is true, that 80% of your efforts will only lead to about 20% of your results. And the way they talk about this in the 4 disciplines of execution is that you have your wildly important goals. Your WIGs is their acronym. And that your wildly important goals get you those 80% of your results. But they're always being dragged at by the whirlwind. What they call the whirlwind is all those urgent tasks that are continually requiring your attention. And by creating a system to focus on that 20% of effort that brings you your 80% of results, that's the first discipline of execution, is to focus on the wildly important. The second discipline is to focus on the lead measures instead of the lag measures. If I want to increase revenue by 20% this year, that's a lag measure. That's a result from activity that leads to that measure. When I was measuring my sales activity, when I was selling car insurance, earning that prestigious award was an achievement, but I couldn't measure myself by my day and by my week on whether or not I achieved it. What I could measure is, was I making 75 phone calls a day? That's under my control. That's something I can predict. I either am meeting that goal or I'm not meeting that goal. So by identifying the lead measures and acting on those regularly, that's the second discipline of execution. The third discipline is to keep a compelling scoreboard, measuring that activity. Are you making those phone calls? Are you meeting your word count? Putting a spreadsheet somewhere in Google Drive or hiding it in the back of your notebook, that's not effective. Keeping a compelling scoreboard where you can see it on the door to your office, behind your computer monitor, in a place where you can't deny whether or not you're meeting your activity goals. This is the third discipline, to keep a compelling scoreboard. The fourth discipline is to create a cadence of accountability. You review your scoreboard every day. You share your results every week. You discuss your goals with a friend. You review the reports and activity, whatever it is for you, whatever cadence of accountability you decide, creating that cadence and sticking to it, that's the fourth discipline of execution. I like to write reports. I write reports to myself. I run my own business. I don't report to anyone else, but I keep track what I do every day and every week and every month, because this is how I create a cadence of accountability. I plan ahead for what I want to do this day, this week, and this month, and then I review what I did this day and this week and this month. What gets measured gets managed. Now, we've gone through a lot of activity, things that you can do, but if you spend all your time doing, you're going to burn out. You're not going to get very far. When you're on a surfboard, you can't be stressed the whole time, or you won't wait for the right wave. You also can't be relaxed the whole time, waiting for the right wave to come along. When it does, you have to go into action. You need to alternate between periods of stress and periods of relaxation. In productivity circles, this is often done with a Pomodoro. The Pomodoro technique is a 25-minute timer. And if you don't know, Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato. And these tomato timers are used by a lot of people to set a 25-minute timer and then take a 5-minute break. And by alternating between these periods of stress and relaxation, you can increase your overall output. There was an Italian economist named Francesco Cirillo, and he developed this Pomodoro technique. And he found that in factories, when people worked for 25 minutes and alternated with a 5-minute break, that the factory had better results. Other people have used the ultradian rhythm, where you spend 90 minutes working really hard and spending a 20-minute break. And there's a German company named Draugiem who found that 52 minutes on, alternating with 17 minutes off, was their optimal switch. But whatever it is that you decide, alternating periods of stress and periods of relaxation is going to give you better results. But you need to be careful of getting too active because of Yerkes-Dodson's law. There's this scientific phenomenon where if you get too active or too stressed, your productivity decreases. We start getting interested or aroused, as they put it in this graph, up into a point of optimal arousal where you meet optimal performance. And if you continue activating beyond that, then your performance goes down. So what the work of productivity is to move up this curve and then come back down the left side of it before you go down the right side of it. Because you can control yourself on the left side. You can ramp yourself up and down. But on the right side of this curve, you lose control. So when you find yourself at the point of optimal arousal and your Pomodoro timer goes off, it's time to go to a power-up. I keep a list of personal power-ups on my door so that when it's time for me to take a break, I don't have to put on my thinking cap and decide what to do. I pick one and I just do one of those. And this is one of my favorite ones. Qi Gong is simple movement and breathing exercises where you can do it standing at your desk. You just you just move your body around a little bit and you breathe. And there's this 20-minute routine that Lee Holden does, and I'll pop a link here in the Skype chat or in the Zoom chat if you'd like to check it out. The Lee Holden has all of these great routines that you can use to rejuvenate yourself right at your desk. So alternating between these periods of stress and relaxation, it helps keep you in flow. You're not going to get too aroused where you can no longer optimally perform. And you do this by alternating between deep work and shallow work. Spending all your time in deep work isn't going to get you very far. And spending all your time in shallow work won't get you very far either. Deep work, as defined by Cal Newport in the book of the same name, are professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive abilities to the limit. Shallow work, on the other hand, is non-cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks, often performed while distracted. Shallow work is when you are open to interruption, and you could see this with office hours. You can get access to a highly credentialed professor by showing up at office hours. But if you show up outside of that window, they're going to tell you to get lost because they're in deep work. And we need to preserve the deep work time. And one of the ways we do that is by allowing others to interrupt us during shallow work. Shallow work is the emails that you need to respond to. It's when people come knocking on your door, when they can get you on the phone. And if you stay available to shallow work during defined periods, you earn the right to preserve time for deep work. If people interrupt you while you're in the middle of your deep work, you're going to get frustrated. You're not going to be able to do good work or spend good time with them. You do your best work when you're focused and uninterrupted. If you happen to dedicate focus time to shallow work and nobody shows up, you get to this magical land known as inbox zero, where you can get everything done. And that's really what we want to do, is we want to get all of the things done that we can so that we can make time for what matters. When you have time for what matters most, then you can work on the things that are most important to you. So we're coming up to the end of the presentation. I'm going to put one more link here in the Skype chat or in the Zoom chat for if you want to get the slides. You can click on this to fill out a survey on my website. The only thing I ask if you want the slides is just fill out a short survey letting me know how I did, because I make my presentations better based on the feedback from people like you who are kind enough to come and join me in person. Now, I also have some programs on productivity where I train a team in these concepts in more detail over 4 weeks. I also run 12-week mastermind accountability programs where I keep teams on track by keeping a compelling dashboard and reviewing those goals regularly. I do book clubs on each of the books that we've gone over today, and I also do one-on-one accountability coaching. So if you'd like to talk to me about any of these programs, go ahead and type yes in the chat box, and I'll follow up with you later. Otherwise, it was really great spending time with you today. I'll send this replay out to you tomorrow if you'd like to review it in the future. And I know we're at the top of the hour, so if you have to skedaddle, feel free to jump off. But if you'd like to stick around, I'll be here for some Q&A. So thanks so much, everybody.